Thank you for joining us this morning for beginner beekeeping Q&A. So we're just going to take a little look at this hive here while you think of your questions. So beginner beekeeping we do each week, and it's a safe place to just put in any questions you have. Sometimes you're a bit afraid to ask questions, but we all started off as new beekeepers once. So feel free to add all those silly questions and we'll get to answering them while we're having a look at some bees here. I'm just going to take the side window off this flow hive and look in and see what's going on. And what I can see already is a bit of nectar. They're turning into honey in this center section here. So that's exciting, showing that the flowers are producing nectar at the moment. The bees are starting to bring it in. We have had quite a bit of time here with not much of a nectar flow at all. So great to see some nectar coming in, the bees turning it into honey. Isn't that just gorgeous to see? Give us a thumbs up if you can see nectar glistening down the cells. If you can see nectar glistening down the cells, just give us the thumbs up there. Also let us know where in the world you are tuning in from. It's really interesting for us. We have flow hives in 130 countries, and it's so amazing that we get to all be here together, answering questions, thinking about bees and learning. I've learnt so much from the audience around the world, so keep asking questions and just put them in the comments below and we'll get to answering them. This is a swarm we caught, and all we did is we caught the swarm on the mango tree over there and we shook the bees into the bottom box, and all that was in the bottom box was your wooden frames. The bees built everything, they got going, the queen started laying her eggs in the comb they had made, and away they went. The foragers collected pollen, the foragers collected nectar to turn it into honey stores, and soon enough we had enough bees in this bottom box here to add the top box. Now we're starting to see the honey coming into the flow frames. So it's exciting to see the whole process from just a swarm of bees and the flow hive to all filling up with nectar like that. So we'll stay tuned. Eventually, hopefully, if we get enough flowers, we'll be harvesting from this. We are in our autumn here in the east coast of Australia, which actually has quite a good honey flow as the paperbark blooms. So depending on where you are in the world, the timing will be different. We get quite good honey in the late autumn and in the winter, whereas most places don't get any honey in the winter, they get more in the summer. So it really does just depend. Are there any questions coming in? If you've got questions, put it in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. So I'm going to have a look at the other side now. It's a neat thing to do is just to go around the hive, look in the windows, see what's going on. We've got a decent number of bees in there now. The population is building up. If I just add a little bit of shadow there, you'll probably be able to see the nectar glistening in the cells there too. And if you look at the landing board, there's a decent amount of bees there too, which is good to see. So this hive's coming along really nicely, considering we just started from a swarm of bees hanging on the tree. So one question we often get, one beginner question, is how do you start? So the way I recommend starting is you jump into it. I mean, people learn in different ways. Some people like to study for years before they take up a pursuit, and other people just like to jump in and learn as you go. I'm the learn as you go type, so I would just get the equipment and then get some bees, install your bees. Now that's the bit that often there's decisions on how to get your bees. So I'll run through the 4 main ways you get started with your hive. So you put your hive together, you've put your coat on it, and you've just got your bottom box here, and you need to put some bees in it. So this hive was started with a swarm. That's one way, but you're unlikely just to suddenly find a swarm unless you're near a big apiary with a whole lot of bees and it's springtime. Then the chances are quite high that you'll find a swarm. The main way people get going with bees is they start with what's called a nucleus. So they start with a starter hive from a bee breeder, which is basically like half a one of these boxes, and it's got 4 or 5 wooden frames in there with your bees that have already drawn out comb. There's a laying queen, there is everything a beehive needs, and it's basically a going little mini hive. And all you need to do is get in your bee suit, get out your smoker, transfer those frames into this bottom box, look after them, and they'll grow. So that's probably the easiest way. You can also order what's called a package, which is an artificial swarm, where the beekeeper just shakes off bees into a container, and they can actually be sent in the mail like that. Usually sent with a mated queen in a little queen cage with some candy, and the whole idea is you shake them into the hive, you put the queen in there, and they'll start from that. So that's another way you can go. Another common way is take a split, and you can do that by taking a split from a friend, and often you're helping them too, because they might have a hive in the springtime especially where there's too many bees. The bees are just flowing out the front and they're all the way up and they're hanging down, and if left like that they'll probably split themselves and swarm. So you'll actually be helping them to relieve a bit of congestion in the hive by taking some of the frames away from the brood nest and taking a split, and you can start from that. We've got videos showing you step by step, both on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook live stream, also at thebeekeeper.org if you want a professional handheld course that's made to take you from square one all the way through to a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. Any questions coming in?
We have a question from Estella on how to get spare parts for her super.
Okay, if you need spare parts, we're always here to help. Just jump on our website, honeyflow.com. You'll be directed to your local nation store, and from there we actually have spare parts in warehouses around the world, so it should be quite quick for you to get those spares, assuming the thing you're after is in the warehouse. So get in touch and we will help you. You can also just phone up the number on the website, and one of our friendly team here will answer your call and help you get those spares.
We also have a question from Leanne. She's watching the live on YouTube. She says, I have evidence of hive moth. What is the best steps to combat it?
Okay.
She's in southeast Queensland, sorry.
So they get called wax moth. Now wax moth doesn't really affect the hive inside unless your hive is really weak and almost about to die anyway. Wax moth is something that's annoying for beekeepers when they're storing their equipment. You might have wax in frames and you're storing them inside, and the wax moth comes, lays their eggs, and they can even chew away and damage the wood, and they'll certainly damage the wax in the frames. So with a flow hive, we don't tend to have to do all that storage of stickies, they get called, where we're taking boxes off the hive and we're storing them away for winter. Most often we're keeping all the equipment in the hive, so wax moth don't tend to be a problem with flow hives. Where you might see them is in the tray area down here. This is our pest management tray, and as you can see, debris builds up, including little bits of wax. And there you can actually see the wings of a wax moth. So some wax moth, there's one there, some wax moth have actually taken advantage of the wax down here. But if you're getting a lot of wax moth build up down here because the wax is in here, the simple solution is just clean out your tray and that problem will go away. But it's not really a problem for your hive because the bees will keep any wax moth out of the hive. If you've got a different answer to that question, please chime in. Perhaps in a very cold country, wax moth could move into part of a hive while the bees are boiling at the other. Not sure. We're here in a subtropical climate, so we don't have any trouble with wax moths. And if you've got answers to other people's questions, please chime in. It's wonderful how the community helps each other.
You have another question. This one's from our Facebook Live. They're asking what the best way is to remove the super and shift the bees into the brood box in order to pack down for winter. Do you shake the bees off, and then what do you do with the flow frames and the honey and the nectar?
So there's a bit of a choice whether you want to remove the flow hive super, which is my father and I's invention, where we can harvest honey straight out of the hive. Some people do, some people don't. If you're in a really cold climate, it is normal to reduce the size of your hive. So that may mean taking your flow super off. I would suggest at least taking the excluder out for winter so the queen can move freely around the hive and follow the ball of bees as they consume honey in boxes up higher in the hive. So one tip there, if you're in a cold climate where you get long cold winters, then remove the queen excluder. If you want to remove the super as well, by all means do that. To answer your question, to get the bees off the frames, you first lift the frames out, and then it's a case of shaking the remaining bees off and then brushing any that are left. You can use our bee brush we have here, which I think is available on its own now too. It came out with our caddy, which is this handy little box here with all your tools and trinkets in it, all in one place. You've got your logbook here, which helps really record what's going on in your apiary, tools and so on. So that's a handy little box, but the bee brush will help to brush those bees off, and you can take those frames away and store them as you say. Now, storage of frames, if there is honey on them, the best spot to store them is in a deep freeze. So if you happen to have a freezer that's big enough, that is perfect. You can just put them straight back on when your bees are ready for it, and they'll keep going from the nectar frames. If you don't have the ability to put them in a freezer there, and it's not cold enough in your area over winter, then fermentation might occur or mold might occur. So you may need to dry the frames out, and that means harvest any remaining honey, let the bees lick them clean, then take those frames away, store them. If there's no honey on them, then there won't be any issues with mold or fermentation. But as said, freezer is the best way to store them.
Coco's watching the Facebook Live. She's from New Caledonia. She's saying her colony is strong, but they have been swarming twice. The bees weave into the super but do not store honey. What should she do?
Aha, New Caledonia, amazing. So if that can happen sometimes, but it's rare. Normally bees won't swarm until they've filled their honey supers and they've really built up in the hive. But occasionally you get genetics that are so swarmy, they'll swarm before they've even stored much honey in a hive. I have had a hive like that once, and the way to fix that problem is actually introduce a new queen. So if you do have bee breeders in New Caledonia, get another queen that hopefully has genetics that are a bit less swarmy. Sometimes when you start from a swarm, you of course get genetics that are more likely to swarm. So I'm not sure the way you started, but if you're getting multiple swarms in a season, what we usually do is replace the queen with some genetics that are less swarmy, because it can just be a bit annoying when the bees are naturally dividing and swarming off before they've completed their honey super. Another tip for you, if you're just wanting to see a bit more action on the flow frames, you're getting impatient, is to scrape some comb off the top of the frames. If your hive is ready to have a super, then normally they're starting to put some comb right on top of your brood frames. Scrape that off, and just with your hive tool like this, you'll be mashing it into the surface of the flow frame. So obviously you've got the flow frame out, and you've got the wax there, and you're mashing it into the surface like that. And what you'll find is the bees will quickly get that wax, recycle it, use it to coat the cells in wax and complete them. And that can be a way just to speed up that process and get some activity on your flow frames quicker.
Anya is watching from Canada. She's saying they're still under snow there right now. She's getting her bees in May, but it will still be quite cold in the evenings. What should she do to help protect them during the cold evenings, as there won't be many blooms at this time? Is there a supplement or something she can give them?
Yes, great. Canada is an amazing place to keep bees because the season is compressed into such a short amount of time, so everything flowers at once. We had John Gates, a commercial beekeeper from Canada here, and he told us a lot of stories about the beekeeping there. He was one of our original testers going back 9 years ago before we launched. And amazingly, because you've got so much nectar flow there in Canada compressed into a small season, the bees just are almost explosive when they build up, and they can store, you hear these stories of a whole super full of honey in one day. Absolutely incredible. So you've got your nucleus box, which is your half-size brood box, and you're waiting for, you're wondering whether it's how to keep them going while you wait for the weather to warm up. Now, to do that, the best thing to do is probably feed them a little bit of sugar water. And we've got videos on how to make yourself a quick feeder where you can put some sugar syrup, so you've got 1 part water to 1 part nectar. Apparently we've just lost audio, so sorry about that. Might start that question again. I'll just put this here. Hopefully that's a bit better. Give us a thumbs up if you can hear us now. So in order to keep your bees going until you're ready to put them into your flow hive, so you've got your nucleus and you want to install them, then you can feed them sugar water. So 1-to-1 solution of sugar and water will simulate nectar. That'll just keep them going while the season warms up a little bit. So that's very common for beekeepers to do in those colder regions, is to feed them prior to the spring flow. And you can make a feeder just by getting a Ziploc bag, filling it full of sugar syrup, carefully doing it up, put some pinholes in it, and just rest it on the inner cover under here. So you can just rest it right here. Take this plug out and the bees will come up and they will actually suck on those pinholes in that Ziploc bag full of sugar water. So that's a quick, easy one for you to make. You can also make a jar feeder which turns upside down on this hole by putting some nail holes in the lid of a jar and turning it upside down like that.
Fernanda wants to know how many years the flow hives will work for.
So that's a great question. We have customers now that are 8 years in and still going. I've got frames in my apiary that are 8 years in. So it's not to say that there isn't maintenance in that time. You might find that some of your wooden parts need replacing at that point, and you might find that your flow frames need a clean at that point. So when you get about 5 years in, some customers are saying it's good to clean the flow frames by taking them out and using a pressure washer just to blast away a lot of the wax. And you put them in, they can start again. You can also use a hot water pressure washer, and an easy thing to do is get a cheap normal pressure washer and connect it to a nice hot water tap in your house, and that will do an even better job of cleaning the wax off those frames. You put them in and you should be able to keep going. If you do have any problems with your flow frames, do get in contact. We've tried to design them to last as long as possible, and we don't, and while that's happening for most people, we don't have a flawless record. We have had some batch issues where there's been some brittleness in the plastic, but if that happens to you, just let us know and we'll help you out.
We had a question from the YouTube live. Balu asks to saying, you said you added the super when there are enough bees in the bottom box. How do you decide that?
Okay, so the time to add the super is when they've filled out all of the frames. So in here we have 8 wooden frames all the way across, and they're just empty if you're doing naturally drawn comb, or perhaps you've put a foundation sheet in them. But wait till they're using all of those frames and they've drawn wax out. They've made their honeycomb structures in every one of those brood frames before you put your top box on. Otherwise you'll be waiting a while and you'll be giving them extra space to keep warm and so on before they need it. So just wait till they've filled that and there's plenty of bees in the bottom box before you put your super on.
The question from YouTube also goes on to ask if you should add a second brood box before the Flow Hive Super.
So I would say no. You're better off letting them start to store honey in the super. If you add a second brood box and then the Flow Super, you might be waiting a whole another year before you get any stores and you'll be getting impatient. So I would say add it in this configuration first, let that fill up, or at least start filling up before you start adding more brood boxes or more supers. Now have a look here. This is interesting. You've got bees sleeping down cells. So bees shift work, and when they get a little tired, they'll just have a nap down that cell, like that. So the hive works all day, all night, and they will just have a snooze when they need to in a cell like that. That's really neat. You can actually tap on them and wake them up, but that might be a little mean.
There's a question coming in from YouTube. Mason from Chicago just installed a package and was wondering what the queen does in a frameless hive.
Once more, question?
So Mason from Chicago just installed a package and was wondering what the queen does in the frameless hive brood box.
Okay, so she'll do nothing until there's some cells for her to lay on. So she'll just get fed by the workers and wait till they've built a comb structure before she can start to lay. It's a bit the same when people use foundation. She can't do any laying until they've actually drawn cells for her to lay in. Not only that, but the worker bees will draw those cells and they'll give them a good clean, and they'll put a scent in there, almost like the door hanger on a hotel room, saying this room's ready to go. And then the queen knows she can go and lay in that cell. So the queen just has to wait until they have the cells for her to lay in.
Beck from Toowoomba is watching on YouTube. She said she has condensation in the super. How can she fix that?
So condensation isn't much of an issue in my mind. It's something that naturally occurs when you have humidity and then a cool surface. And humid air can hold quite a lot of moisture, but cooler air can't. So the moisture has to fall out of the air and the little droplets will condense onto the inner walls of your hive. Now, if you've got windows on your hive, you'll see that because you're seeing the inside. And not only that, it'll be slightly less insulating with this cut here. So what you'll find is you'll see sometimes condensation building up on the windows. Now, it's actually important for a beehive in those colder times. If they're not able to fly and get water, they can actually use the water from inside the hive. So in extreme cold areas, the condensation becomes an important thing for the bees. What you don't want to have is water dripping from the inner cover or the ceiling of the hive and your bees getting all wet. If you're getting that, then there's an issue. If there's just condensation on the inside, it's not a problem.
Ken is watching the Facebook Live. He's saying he lives in a humid part of Texas. Would this kind of climate work for the flow system? How will the timber last?
Absolutely, we have lots of happy flow hive beekeepers in Texas, so you can join the club there and you will find that you'll get good honey flows in that region and a lot of good beekeeping. So the hives, to my knowledge, aren't suffering any issues there with the heat. We get plenty of hot areas in Australia here also. Can't wait for that honey to flow in and fill up these frames. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments. For beginner beekeeping here today, we're answering questions of beginner beekeepers. So if you've got those questions that might feel a bit silly to ask, then here's a good spot to ask them. We all started off as new beekeepers once, so ask away. The community here will be friendly to you.
We had a question from YouTube. This person is saying they installed their first nuke ever and wants to know when they should do their first inspection.
Lovely. So if you've installed a nuke, then it's a really nice time. In fact, it's a great way to start beekeeping is with a nuke, because the colony is really small and easy to work with, and you can build up your confidence that way. So by all means, get in there and do some inspections and watch them as they grow. And if you're doing naturally drawn comb, great idea to make sure they're building straight on the comb. So you can get in there every week or every couple of weeks if you want to, and check on their progress, and also check on your local requirements. Here in Australia, in New South Wales, where we are, in every 16-week period we do need to do a mite count, because we're trying to stop the varroa mite spreading here in Australia. So there might be requirements in your region as well, but by all means get in there and enjoy the process. It's a great place to learn when your colony's nice and small like that.
We have a question from Instagram, our Instagram Live. Does the flow hive allow the need to store enough food for winter, or do you need to supplement feed?
So normally your bees will be able to store enough in their hive to last the winter, but that depends where you are in the world. So bees are storing honey for themselves for those long cold times ahead. Now here we don't get those long cold times because we're in a subtropical region, but each place will have some local knowledge about how much stores you need in your hive for your hive to survive the winter. So, you know, up north, in the northern parts of America, you'll find that it might be a box and a half you need, or a whole box of honey you might need to survive the winter. Now, you can let them eat the honey out of the flow frames. If you take the excluder out, the queen can travel with those bees up there, or you could decide to take the super off. If you were going to take the super off and you had, say, 6 months of cold ahead, then you probably would need another box or half a box of storage for your bees to survive that long cold winter. So it really depends is the answer. And you can by all means add more conventional supers or more brood boxes, which mainly fill up with honey anyway, to your hive in those regions where you need it, a lot of storage for the winter ahead.
We have Jane, who's messaged in from the Instagram Live. She's on the south coast of New South Wales. The weather is still warm. All the super frames are 90% full and capped, but not filled, and capped when looking from the end. There doesn't appear to be too many bees working in the super at the moment. Should I harvest a frame to create some space?
Okay, should you harvest a frame to create some space? If there's not a whole lot of bees in there, it depends on the number of bees. If you need to create space in your hive, then harvesting some honey does help. But the reason why you're creating space is usually for the queen to lay down the bottom. Now, if you harvest a frame here in a hive that's all full, then they will actually move honey from the bottom box up, creating more space in the bottom for the queen to lay. If you've got a lot of honey in your super, by all means harvest some, they're usually storing more than they need, and you can enjoy some too. So have a look in the side windows. If you're seeing that it's all capped across here, even if it's not quite capped on the end, then if you're seeing it there all capped, then you can be sure that frame is mostly full and you can harvest it. So it sounds like you've got a bit of honey stored and you can go ahead and enjoy some.
Heather is on our Facebook Live. She's asking how do you get rid of small hive beetle in Australia? Are the traps effective?
They are effective. You won't get rid of them altogether. Now, the best defence for small hive beetle is actually a strong colony. So if your bees are strong in your hive, you've got plenty in there like this, then the hive beetle isn't an issue. If your colony swarms, say, all of a sudden the bee numbers drop and there's not enough bees in your hive to really chase those beetles around, then what you'll need to do is activate your pest management trap down here by, first of all, you'd clean out your tray, add a bit of oil in there, or in the summer months you could use soapy water as a hive beetle trap. Make sure when you slide the tray back in that there's no bees under here, and you slide it all the way till it hits the back. You've got cooking oil covering the bottom of the tray, and when you put this in, make sure it's pressed all the way in so no bees can get up and around that tray and into that oil. The bees will chase those beetles around the hive. A bunch of them will fall through the screen and die in the hive beetle trap you've made below. And that'll be a helpful thing if your colony is weak and needs a bit of a hand with those beetles.
So we have a question from the Facebook Live. Sassia would like to know if you can use a flow hive in New Zealand when the bees are making crystallised honey.
You can. We have flow hive beekeepers in New Zealand. Now, normally the honey is crystallising after it's been harvested. So chime in if you've got local knowledge in New Zealand, but the New Zealanders use conventional harvesting techniques, which means they're taking the frames out of a hive and spinning them in a centrifuge. And the honey won't come out unless it's liquid to do that. So it's the same here with the flow hive. The honey won't come out if it's candied. In an extreme scenario, you might get candied honey on the edge of the hive, or even partly candied honey so it is coming out cloudy. Now that's not too much of a problem. You just might get a little less honey out of your hive, and the rest you can leave there for the bees to use. Above the brood nest here, you'll be harvesting in the warmer months, and the hive actually keeps the brood at about body temperature, and that warmth flows up and keeps at least all of these centre frames nice and warm, so you'll be unlikely to get candied honey in your hive unless you don't have any bees in there, and then you've got a different issue to deal with.
Jumping back to our Instagram Live, we have a question from someone in Colombia wanting to know, in tropical countries, is the mechanism blocked due to the high production of propolis?
It isn't. So you can get a whole lot, you can, even if the flow frames have been used for brood and you've got all of those cocoons and dark brown wax on there, it still will operate. So you may get situations where it's harder to turn the handle, but it shouldn't stop the mechanism from working. So what I suggest is, if it is hard to turn the handle, just do the frame in segments. So harvest a little bit at a time. That'll make it a lot easier to turn that handle. And interestingly enough, if frozen propolis in the frames, because some bees do use a whole lot of propolis in their comb building, others don't. But when it gets to freezing point, it actually gets quite brittle and moves quite easily. So you've got this kind of temperature affecting the mechanism as well. But the flow hive definitely works in those colder places. My nephew has been right up to Nebraska filming people with their flow hives and harvesting honey. And again, you're harvesting in those warmer times anyway, and the bees are keeping the hive warm by disconnecting their wing muscles and vibrating to keep their brood warm anyway.
another question from YouTube. Jody would like to know how much extra equipment is needed, such as boxes, frames, lids, wax sheets, swarm box. How much extra is needed to have on hand?
Okay, that's a great question. The answer is a whole lot less than conventional beekeeping. Conventional beekeeping, you need your centrifuge, you need your hot knife, you need your filtering equipment, which is usually buckets with sieves and things, and more and more equipment in your processing shed. With the flow hive, this is it. This is your honey extracting, this is your brood nest. So it's a wonderful simplified version of being able to harvest honey, because it's just such a small footprint in your garden or your yard, and a lot of us don't have much space to use. So people are keeping flow hives on rooftops, on balconies, in tall buildings and all sorts of places. So it certainly is less equipment. The conventional kind of thinking is you store honey in the hive in boxes. As the season goes on, you keep adding boxes, and you might have a tall stack like this by the end of the season, and then you harvest it all at once in a batch, because that's what makes it more efficient to do. A bit of a different mentality when you are looking into a flow hive. Even when you have just a couple of frames full of honey, you could start harvesting them and keeping honey in jars on the shelf instead of boxes on the hive. And what that means for you is you don't need so many boxes to store in your storage area. But getting back to your question, you mentioned a swarm box. Not a bad idea in the springtime to have another box handy, even if it's just a simple brood box like this, and you can make a makeshift lid and base. If your hive does happen to swarm, or you happen to see a swarm, you can take advantage of that, shake that swarm into the box and get another colony going. So great idea to have another box at the ready. Or if you can get a complete whole unit at the ready should you need to catch a swarm and be ready to get another flow hive going. Another thing that you might like to do is get one of these caddies. That's a new thing we have here, that's got your bee brush, it's got your hive tool, it's got your logbook and all sorts of little trinkets to help you in your beekeeping, and just a handy spot to keep your honey harvesting jars. And you've got a tray up here you can take out, you put your honey tubes in that when they're done, and you can wash that out in the sink. So just a handy beekeeping box there, and you've got a little spot to put your flow key. This also actually disconnects, and it can clip to your belt as a tool belt while you're beekeeping, which is quite handy also. So we've tried to solve another little problem in beekeeping there, and that's me trying to find all of the things to do a harvest. It's nice to have them right in the box. And also your brood inspection. The smoker clips on the front here also if you're doing your brood inspections.
We have a question from Randy. This is from the Facebook Live. He's saying in Minnesota he's seeing recommendations for 2 to 3 brood boxes for winter. Will a Flow Hive 2 Plus support the weight with a flow super as well?
Yes, it will. So this base is really quite strong. We haven't heard of any issues with too much weight breaking these cast aluminium, the cast aluminium stand here. And we've got these strong leg bolts here as well, and the ant guards too, which are a handy little widget. So yes, you can stand on top of this, and there won't be any issue here. What you might need to do though is make sure it's on a steady base. So if you're putting it in the garden like this, put some brick pavers down first. So under here in the garden, to stop these hives just sinking into the soil, we have a brick paver just down here, and that will stop that hive just sinking into the ground as the weight comes on. But by all means, stack up your boxes, your stand will be fine.
We have a question, this is from the YouTube Live, from Mika in the Barossa Valley, South Australia. She's asking, when preparing my hive for winter, it's suggested to remove the queen excluder. Will the queen damage the flow super if she shifts up and lays in it?
She won't damage the flow super. So what you're doing is right. For a long cold winter, you can remove the queen excluder, and that just allows the queen to travel with the balls or a ball of bees. You may even find you don't need to in your area. Just ask your local beekeepers whether they would remove the queen excluder for winter. But if you've got a situation where the bees are moving up here to consume honey, the queen could be stuck below the excluder and perish over the winter, and you'll start your new season without a queen. So removing that is certainly a good idea. Come springtime, if you forget, then there's a chance that your queen won't lay in the flow frames anyway. I've got quite a lot of hives running with no excluder, and she doesn't lay in there, but then again some hives will. So you've probably got a 50-50 chance there whether your queen in the springtime will start laying in the flow frames. So if you want to run without an excluder altogether, then you'll just need to check whether your queen is a flow frame layer. If she's not, you can just leave it out permanently. If you've got an issue where she has laid eggs in the flow frames, then it's not a big deal. All you need to do is shake the bees out of the super, make sure the queen's down here. If you can't find the queen, just shake all of the bees down into the bottom box, put your excluder back on, super back on, and away they'll go, and the queen will be down there, and any remaining brood in here will have emerged 24 days later. It's, say, drone being the longer gestation. Those drones would have all emerged 24 days later, so then you can go ahead and harvest after that. Always long answers. Keep asking questions. Today it's beginner beekeeping. If you've got questions about getting started, let us know. If you've got questions about beekeeping, then we're here just to answer any silly questions, and that's okay.
We have a question from the Facebook Live. Al wants to know, when you harvest honey from a frame, do you remove it so that the wax caps can be removed?
That was a real win when we were inventing the flow hive. We had all of these mechanisms to take the wax capping off the frames. Now you can't see it there, but when the bees are finished filling up those cells, they'll put their wax sheet over the top. It's a bit like the lid on a preserving jar. And we were building mechanisms that would actually take off the wax capping inside the hive, thinking we would need to do that. But luckily for us, the bees are clever enough to know when the honey's drained out from beneath their feet and the wax is just sitting there on top of an empty cell. And they pretty quickly get to work uncapping those cells and recycling that wax, and the whole process starts again. So that was a real win. Keep those questions coming in. Also let us know whereabouts in the world you are tuning in from.
We have another question from our Facebook Live. Jerry wants to know if you test the moisture content in the honey, even if it's capped.
Okay, can you test the moisture content in the honey?
Do you test it?
Oh, do we test it? No, not usually. I mean, after a while you get a pretty good feel for if your honey's quite liquid. It'll always come out a bit warm and be more liquid in the jar, but once it cools it should look like honey. If it's still looking quite liquid, then yes, it's probably got a too high moisture content and it may not keep for months. You may need to consume that before it ferments, or you can make mead out of it. So occasionally you will get a harvest that will have a too high moisture content, but mainly it's perfect because you've waited for the bees to cap off the cells, and that's when the bees are happy that the moisture content is low enough to keep. So no big deal if you accidentally harvest some honey that's too liquid, but usually you can get a good idea from looking in the windows and know when it's time to harvest and that the moisture content will be lower enough. But by all means, if you want to check the moisture content, you can buy what's called a refractometer, which uses the way light refracts through different mediums to tell what the moisture content is of the honey, and you want it down below that 20% range so it will keep.
Heather is asking, why are her bees so angry and yours appear to be very calm?
That's genetics. So bees, just like any animal, have their temperament. Now, with bees it's a little different because the genetics for the queen actually come from herself, and then 30 or more drones that she's mated with on the wing. So she'll mate with drones from all around when she does her first couple of mating flights, and then she won't mate again. So the genetics is set for the rest of her time as the egg layer of the hive. Now, if she happened to mate with drones that perhaps had an aggressive trait, then some of your bees will be aggressive. And I used to keep very aggressive bees. I know all about it. And as soon as you go near them, they'd be hassling you. So if you've got bees like that, then if you want nice calm genetics like this, then replace the queen. So if that's something that's a little bit daunting for you, then get some help from an experienced beekeeper to come and help you find the queen, take her away, then a day later introduce a new queen. And if that's come from a bee breeder, they'll be breeding for nice, calm, gentle bees, and hopefully hygienic and productive ones as well. So great idea to re-queen in that case.
On the Instagram Live, we have a question from Meek asking, would you say this is a good hive to use as a starter? And do you get as much honey as you would from a regular hive?
Okay, good questions. Yes, half of our flow hive beekeepers are brand new to beekeeping, and the only thing that's really different is the way we extract the honey from the hive, and this simplifies it massively. So you don't have the learning curve of the centrifuge and the decapping and the processing shed to set up and filtering and all of that. So it's a great way to start is with a flow hive, and we've got starter bundles with your bee suit and all the things you need to get started. So by all means, it's a great way to start. And whether or not they produce more honey really depends mostly on the colony in the hive. So in theory, you could say that you'll get more honey production and less wax production out of a flow hive, because they use 7 kilograms of honey to produce a kilogram of wax, and because the wax is recycled around here in the flow super, you're not taking all of that wax out like you do in conventional extractions. So the theory says you should get more honey production, but in reality it seems pretty similar. That's a new one. So can you fix it to a floor? Now, bees themselves are pretty good guard dogs if someone's trying to steal the hive. Nevertheless, you do get some hive theft in the world. So presumably these people that are stealing hives are beekeepers. And you hear of that in New Zealand, where you have a gold rush on the Manuka honey and people are stealing hives because there's thousands of dollars worth of honey inside them. Now, that's not something I hear about in our region, but there probably would be a neat way to connect the hive to the ground to make it a little bit harder. But I would say if somebody really wants to steal your bees, they're probably going to disconnect any screws you put down into the floor anyway. If you've got any good answers to that question, then please chime in.
We have a question coming in from the Instagram Live. This person is from Brisbane. They were told that you should remove and place the flow super on a table to harvest the flow frames, or you risk honey flowing into the brood box. Is that correct?
Okay, the answer is no. We harvest, and many customers all around the world harvest with their super on. Now, yes, you may get honey spilling inside the hive. that is something that's not new to flow hives. I used to keep a lot of conventional hives, and even the other day I was opening the roof of a conventional hive and broke a whole lot of honeycomb. And guess what? Honey was flowing down through the hive and out the entrance. So it's something that's not new to bees, is to have broken, spilling honey inside the hive, and bees are very good at cleaning up any honey spills. Now if you're getting major spills where all of the honey is spilling into the hive and none's coming out this way, then you've got a problem and you should get in contact with us to help you troubleshoot that. We'll put levels in the side of the hive to help remind you that you do need a tilt on your hive for the honey to harvest out this way. But you will get some spills from some of your frames sometimes, and that's just because of the fluid dynamics of the different viscosities. You might have a higher viscosity down low than up top, so it's moving slow at the bottom but fast at the top, and you get honey spilling down, and all sorts of other reasons like wax build-up at the lower edge of the frame from perhaps not closing your flow frames properly. When you finish harvesting, make sure you turn your key in the top slot, leave it there for a minute or two to push all your frame parts close together. If they're stuck like this, if they're sort of left like this because you pushed it quickly and it bounced up, then you get a lot of wax build up at the bottom as they complete this comb. And then imagine you've got wax here, it moves up just a little bit more, and there's not much of a honey pathway for the honey to flow down, and therefore it might spill out the side. So there's different reasons. Also thixotropic honeys, you could get spills. But if you're having trouble, then the simple thing to do is just harvest 1 or 2 or 3 of your frames at once and leave the rest for the bees. That way, if you do get any spills inside the hive, it'll be lessened because you're not harvesting very many frames. But I would say always harvest on your hive. That's what we've designed it for. Have a go. If you have any trouble, let us know.
We have a question from James on Instagram. If my super isn't full for winter, should I remove it?
You could. If it's completely empty, you may as well just remove it. They haven't started using it, your colony's too small, and that will keep your hive box smaller, easier for them to look after. If they've started filling it, then you've got a bit of a question where you'll need to decide whether you want to perhaps harvest the amount of honey in there, let them lick it dry and remove it, or leave it on there for the bees. Or you might take the whole box off and stick it in a freezer if you happen to have a good freezer that's big enough. So it's some options there, but yes, if they haven't started using it at all and you've got a winter coming, then you could just take the box off, brush those bees out or let them fly out, and then you can store that, put it back on in the springtime.
Rosie from the Facebook Live wants to know if it's okay to locate a hive next to a house while a reno is happening. Will the noise of power tools disrupt them?
So general noise of power tools doesn't. Things like mowing in front of the hive will tend to disrupt them, and it depends on 2 things: how close it is and the aggressive traits of your bees. If you've got nice friendly bees that you can walk around the hive and they don't tend to bother anyone, then it's probably fine. But by all means, err on the side of caution. Ask your builders whether anyone's got allergies to bees. Perhaps someone has anaphylaxis, like when you get that peanut allergy, and some people get that from bee stings. That's rare, but can happen. Swelling's normal from bee stings, but anaphylaxis and not being able to breathe is a serious thing that you need to get to hospital, all of that. So I can't advise you on the first aid there, but we do have pages that are written by first aid qualified people to advise you on things like EpiPens and so on. But yes, as said, check with your builders and also have a think about the distance from the building site. Power tools won't affect it, but more machinery working really close to the hive, especially at the entrance, tends to wind bees up. Okay, So thank you so much for all of your great questions. We've got questions streaming in from multiple platforms, so if we've missed your question, then we'll get to answering them in text form. Thank you for tuning in, and thanks to all those beginners out there who are taking the leap of putting out their question that might feel a bit scary to ask in some beekeeping places. This time of month we like to support our new beekeepers by just answering any silly questions you might have. So thank you so much, and also thanks for the people that are chiming in and helping answer all of the questions that are coming in as well. It's so good to see the community getting involved and the way they help each other. I've learnt so much. Same time next week, if there's something you'd like us to cover, then put it in the comments below and we'll have